I'll run it here. That's no
Okay.
problem.
All right. And you'll take questions during this presentation?
Yep. You see
Okay.
my screen now with the presentation on it?
Yes, sir, we do.
Yes.
Okay. They say what I'm going to talk to about tonight is some of the evolution of the station up to where it is now and what we've been doing with it. So I'm going to say a little bit about why I've done this, the hardware, the software, a little bit about the network stuff we were talking about with Chuck there earlier, and the software and how mine works. Now, I'm going to go through these probably pretty quick, but I'm not going to try and read them like some presenters do. It gets kind of old. But basically, my station has been a home for stationless contesters for years up here, with having operators coming up from New York City or people that don't have much but wires, and they come up here and operate. And I also get them to operate up here in some of the big contests. For any of this stuff, of course, there's no charge. I do accept donations, time, hardware, good scotch, stuff like that. But now with this COVID stuff, I'm also setting it up, or even before that, I was setting it up for single people to come in and operate remotely. But now I'm setting it up mostly for multi and single op contesters to. What have you highlighted me or something there? Well, whatever.
I did.
Okay.
I put you in spotlight, and the recordings are running now.
Okay. And why I'm doing this is to try and show people out there what I've done and how easy it can be to set up remote access, but then also some other things that make it better for operators out there. Another thing about why is this is what we did last fall. I spent a lot of the summer getting things set up. So instead of just having 2 stations here, VHF and an HF, I can set up all 6 stations on HF now and have all of them operate remotely. And doing this, we got these different combinations with no more than 3 operators in the shack, and anywhere from 4 to 9 remote operators. We had a couple of the highest scores we've ever had in worldwide sideband, up 65, 6,600 Qs up here. Again, mostly with remote operators. Hardware stuff, I know you can go see this a lot on my website. It hasn't changed too much over the years, but we're always putting up different antennas, trying different things. But I'm going to go through quickly how all that ties into the remote operating. Again, all the stacks outside, the 4 squares, the beverages. There's a lot of switching involved, a lot of this to be able to run either an SO2R station or flip a few switches and become 6 separate HF stations. And this is where all the wires come in. This was actually one of the first parts when I decided I was going to seriously set the station up to be on 24/7 as an HF remote, so that anybody that I signed up to come in here could connect at any time and not have to worry about whether there were thunderstorms and I had unplugged things.
I was there that day.
Yeah, there's been a few of those, but the station has basically been on 24/7 since this box went in. It's all lightning arresters. The KF7P did the copper work that everything's attached to. And then I took a couple weeks of moving wires around, reinstalling everything, running wires back and forth, and getting all the lightning arresters set up. I said all that's grounded to the house perimeter, the other towers, the power sources coming in. So there was a lot of grounding work and connecting that went into this.
Since you've activated it, how many arresters or other devices in this box have you had to replace?
None so far.
That's good to know.
Everything has lasted and performed perfectly since I put that in 5 years ago, 6 years ago now. something like that. Now inside, there's a lot of stuff. You can see just this one wall up here is all the switching for the beverages. And again, it can either go to 3 separate stations, 40, 80, and 160, or everything with flipping those 2 manual switches can go to the SO2R station, and each of the SO2R radios can have their own beverage. So that's what all that switching is up on the wall. There's a lot more that's under the tables and out of sight, but that's just one example. And of course, you don't recognize boxes, but they're all RCS MFJ boxes with, of course, the plastic lids on them, and they're right over my server rack in order to keep from picking up RFI from, well, the computer stuff right there. That's aluminum foil wrapped all over the tops, and it really does keep some of the RF out of the receive lines there.
Very nice.
It used to be when I went to SO2R setup here, I had that pile on the left with all the rotor control boxes, and all the push button switch boxes got moved over to that arm that was next to the radios. The radios in that picture right on the left side, you turn 90 degrees to the left, you'd be looking at the 2 radios. But I had to stretch cables all the way across the room and back and forth to get all those boxes up on that one shelf. Now it goes to the right box, the right picture there, which is Green Heron, that's running on a touch screen. It's just on the other side. The radios in that picture are just to the right. So the operator can just look off to his left, and it's a touch screen. You can pick antennas, turn rotors, everything right there. The Green Heron stuff is the only way that I would ever have gotten this done.
And that touch screen is the balls.
Yeah, that works great. I've actually, this was actually the older touch screen I had to get rid of because it got very intermittent.
So each time you change a band, a different labeled button box comes up with the antenna choices for that band. A different rotor globe menu pops up and shows you where those antennas are. You touch the color of the beam pattern on the globe, and you drag your finger to move the antenna, and you'll know where you're covering. It's a joy to use.
Yeah, and that's actually set up there just for one radio. If I can bring up the live one, that's a picture of it set up for 2 radios. It's split in the middle with the left radio on the left half, right radio on the right half.
And the beverage.
And the beverages that change for the band too, because this has the 40-meter vertical arrays that Charlie came up with a design for just for 40 meters.
And the preamp control.
And the preamps. Yes, it's also got preamps that you can turn on and off here if I don't touch the right place. And a help pager that sets off an alarm upstairs.
Save me, Davey, save me.
Yes. Dogs do not like that. Anyway, let's move along here. Computers, hardwares, network, servers, I say all this network and computer stuff is right below all those switches. So it's all well grounded, shielded, whatever. Typical station inside, this is one of the single band stations. Amplifiers, radio. One of the big improvements I put in on these is put in APC UPS that also handles the radio.
What brand is that?
That's APC, Charlie.
Thank you.
So all of the computers and radios are protected with UPSs now. That was another part of setting up, because I didn't want things going down if we had, power glitch middle of the night or something. And this is that SO2R station. the touch screen on the left for the antennas, the big monitor in the middle to get enough room to do SO2R, FT8, and RIDI, and you got a lot of windows on there when you go to do FT8 SO2R. This is also just recently changed. The two ACOMs aren't up there anymore. I got that Power Genius XL up there in place of those. So those two are now in 15 and 20 meters. And the VHF station just for completeness. Single Barefoot TS2000, and this is also set up for remote access. Essentially the same system, the green heron to control the rotor, and the other stuff is the same as the main HF station.
6.2 and 440?
Yeah, that's all it's got. I don't have the 1296 or anything in there. Okay, power protection, I say everything is on UPSs, except basically the lights and the single band amps. The SO2R amps, which is available 24/7 for remote use. Even the amps are on a big UPS.
What brand UPS is that?
Yeah, that's another APC.
Very nice.
Does I think up to 20 amps for SO2, up to 20 amps, but of course only 1 amp transmits at a time. And then just in case we do lose power, the UPSs kick in, and then I have an 18 kW generator outside that automatically starts up and switches over.
Oh, okay.
Usually within 5 or 10 seconds. Although we have had a few times when I had a little trouble with the generator, wanted to keep dropping out, but that's been fixed up, so it runs pretty good now. So that was all part of getting it done. Unfortunately, the one UPS I have downstairs is not APC, but oh well. Although it was almost replaced by APC ones when something happened to it, but I got it fixed. The software overview, there's 3 different things that are really important with the software. The one is the antennas and rotor control, which we've already seen a little bit about. The next part is the radio control, and then the amp control and or monitoring. We'll take a quick look at each of those. Again, the antenna and rotor control is all the green heron stuff. The RT21 rotor control boxes, just plug in USB. I've got multi USB adapters all going into that touchscreen computer. And then up on top of it, you could see it in the picture there. Behind the touch screen, there's 2 RF boxes for the switches, because each of those old push button switches that I had custom built years ago now has what used to be in there, but there was enough room to put in a green heron RF remote switch thing that has 8 relay outputs on it. And that just happens to fit in perfectly with the 8x8 switch matrix that's in there. So all you do is flip the switch. It looks like the box is off, but it really turns on the green heron card and lets the rotor, the remote control take over. Drag and drop. Yeah, Charlie mentioned that. It's cute. It takes a little bit of practice to do it, but you sometimes end up picking up the wrong antenna if they're like this, where they're on top of each other. And let's see, radio control. In the beginning, for the first couple of years we had this station set up for remote access, the only radio control we had was done through N1MM, which is good for setting frequencies, modes, grabbing spots, doing all that stuff. But it's fairly limited for other things you can do. There's a couple programmable buttons on the band map. He provides a way to get wide and narrow filters. I programmed a couple of the buttons to give more variations to the filters, because sometimes the wide and narrow weren't very wide or very narrow. And I also programmed one of the buttons to send the cat commands to turn the receive antenna on and off, so you could at least select it. You couldn't tell if it was on or off unless you turned on a preamp or something from the Green Heron, but you could at least get to the beverage antennas on the low bands. There are a bunch of third-party apps, and manufacturers have their own apps. Most of them you can't share the radio with N1MM. Either N1MM gets upset or the other app gets upset because it can't do everything with the radio it wants to. And most of them I've seen take up a lot of screen space. They try and give you the whole front panel of the radio, and you end up losing a lot of screen space for things that you don't use a lot. And they can also, if they're doing that, they're talking to the radio a lot to get the S meter, and most of the time you don't really care about what an S meter reading is anyway. And they do other things that get in the way of better tools. I played with, I don't know, 4 or 5 different apps to control the FT1000 MPs I had before, and then the 2000s, and none of them really worked very well for consistent use remotely. So what I did is, being the software guy, I went and wrote my own app that was meant to play nicely with N1MM, so it doesn't do a lot of stuff that N1MM gets upset about, and it makes use of N1MM's polling of the radio already. So if there's already frequencies being polled from the radio by the logger, it just picks them up and uses them. And it made it, again, so it's nice and small. It doesn't take up a lot of the screen space, and gives you basically just what you need to be able to operate the radio without all the extra stuff that just gets in the way. This is what that app looks like. Right now it's 4 tabs. It was 3 for a while, and I added this DSP options on there because some people wanted them. But it gives you 1 tab that gives you the VFO control, which also gives you some things you can't do or are not very easy to do with N1MM, like switching receive and transmit specifically to which VFO you want, swapping VFOs, things like that are 3 or 4 finger controls in N1MM, if you can remember what they are. The transmit tab gives you all the necessary stuff for Vox and power and the monitor and whatever. Receive gives you the receive antennas, preamps, attenuators, RF, AF gain, and the filters. The RX DSP, I don't think gets used too much, but if you really want to change the CW pitch or shift the IF or something like that, use the noise filters. This is where you would go to do it. And this framework, I started this out with the FT1000 MPs. The 2000s talk almost the same language. I know the Kenwood commands for the TS2000 are almost identical. So there's a lot of easy things that this could probably be adapted for. Controlling the amps, again, I went through several different pieces of software. The ACOM software is very basic, not very friendly. I think they had a lot of big hopes for that to do all sorts of station integration and whatever, but it never really took hold anywhere, and I think it's actually gone now. Somebody was asking me about it because they couldn't find it on the ACOM website, and so they may have just taken it off of there and given up with it. The ACOM director, yeah, it's a British guy, M0, somebody wrote that. It's actually pretty good, works very well. It does a lot of extra stuff. You can actually set it up just by running 2 copies of that, one on a machine connected to the amp and one somewhere else. You can run the amp remotely. It was good. I'd had a lot of that extra stuff that made it not quite so reliable, but it did have a very nice user interface, and he does make the source available for it. So I took his source and simplified it, made it more reliable, but one of the big things I wanted to do was add an interface to the Green Heron software. So when you pick an antenna, right now I only use it for 160, but when you pick an antenna, it retunes the amp. So as soon as you pick the inverted L's or pick the inverted V, you hear the amp switch and it changes tuning to adapt to that antenna. I really needed it for 160 because the 2 antennas are very different. All the other bands, I don't really have ones that are that different, but I could use it for some of the smaller changes also. For the pre-computer amps, all those, the Commander HF 2500s I've got kicking around, this was one I came up with last summer because I wanted to have a way for the remote operators to know that they were putting out power and to also get some kind of warning if the amps were getting too hot. You know, sideband CW, that's not usually a problem, but some of the digital modes, you do have to watch those amps because they can overheat. Oh, just a second here. Put this phone on quiet. Okay. What this is I found, I think on Amazon or whatever, these little A to D modules that plug into a USB jack. You put a couple of resistors on them to add voltage biases and add an RTD little thing, resistance temperature detector, changes resistance as the temperature changes in a predicted way. So you can calibrate it and come up with a temperature. And I wired them into the Daiwa SWR meters I got and just pick off the voltages from them to get the forward and reflected powers. So I made it look a lot like the ACOM things just because it was easier to steal the little bar graphs and to make them all look the same and than to come up with something different.
Very nice.
And on those, there's, what are there, 6? 1, 2, I think there's 6 or 8, 2, 4, 6. Yeah, I think it's 6 inputs into this thing. And it samples every one of them every second and just pumps out the raw data. You know, you don't have to program anything on there. You just got to receive the data from it. Well, it looks like a serial port and convert it to whatever you want to display. Very handy little things. Now, of course, you can't do any of this without a network. And there's lots of different options now on networks. As we were talking about earlier, the FiOS, the ADSL, the cable systems, the new Spectrum fiber that they put in here, which really, I had a lot of confusion talking with the Spectrum people because before they actually installed it, I wanted to find out, what kind of stuff they could offer, whether I could get the static IP addresses, things like that.
Aren't you watching TV?
And what the TV is. But it turns out that for my use, where I needed to be able to host servers here for my web server, to be able to have the remote stuff for people to come in, in order to do that, I needed to have the Spectrum small business account, and which gives about the same speed as a home system, but it gives you the ability to host servers and things like that. And it was really confusing with talking to them, because whenever I was talking to them about business and fiber connections, they kept wanting to send me to the Spectrum Enterprise people. Well, the Spectrum Enterprise is what that station up in Maine has, or something similar, where it's got two fibers that are dedicated all the way to your business, is what they want. Unfortunately, that goes for like starting price is like $1,000 a month. I'm saying, no, I don't want that. What they actually call this fiber they put in here, it's actually a cable system over fiber. So instead of running coax, they run fiber. And Peru happens to be the first town anywhere, I think, in Spectrum that was built from the ground up with fiber. And anybody I talked to there was totally confused for months about it, because they had whole different groups that deal with this kind of fiber, even though it looks like a cable TV system. And I went with them for months there because I was having trouble where local neighbors could not connect to my web server, but people outside the Spectrum system could. And they finally found that they had some routers that were not up to date on their firmware. It took us months to find them. Anyway, in for your LAN, on your side of that network, we have the options to have wired, wireless, or optical connections between routers and computers. I started out with wired stuff here many, many years ago, and that was the only times I ever had trouble in the house with lightning taking out equipment. You get nearby lightning strike, and it would blow out the 10 base 2 coax Ethernet. I had to end up disconnecting all the coax connections every time we weren't using it. And ever since then, I went to wireless for all the computers in here except for what's in the server rack. On wireless, you've got options now, the 2 gigahertz, 5 gigahertz. If you're worried about latency, speed, connections, you want to use the 5 gigahertz. It just works so much better. And the routers, the options and adaptability and stuff on it for the 5 gigahertz stuff is amazing. Optical, I had thought about. You can get the equipment. You can get pre-made cables. It's not real easy yet. I went looking for it about 6 or 8 months ago, and the stuff's out there, but you really got to know what you're looking for to get it. And I just wasn't happy with some of the options that were around, so I just stayed with the wireless. Switches versus hubs. If you got to expand it, get more computers, more equipment. I prefer switches because they route the data to just what needs it. Well, let me go ahead the slide here, as I'm already talking about it. No, actually, it's on this one. The hubs are simple. If you don't have a lot of data, you don't have a lot of worries about data collisions and whatever, but the hubs are basically just like a T connector that brings the two devices together, 4 or 5, however many devices you've got. They're a little bit cheaper, but switches are so cheap now that I would always go with those if you have any choice. We've been talking a lot already about, the LAN versus the internet. The one big thing is the takeaway in this is, while your ISP is responsible for troubleshooting their side of the connection, sometimes you really got to keep after them to get what you're paying for. And that's why I say it took me months going through 2 layers of supervisors and finally get up to a manager that could call a meeting. I knew he was a manager because he could call a meeting and find the problem. It's like some of the things we were talking about with Chuck before the meeting there. Speed is good. The higher the speed of the connection you've got, the shorter time it takes for each packet to get out. So it does slightly affect the latency, but there are bigger things that add up in the latency part of it. The important part is for streaming the desktop video and the audio with reasonable resolution and the types of things that are moving on the screen when you're doing logging and operating radios. You have to figure on anywhere from 500 kilobits to maybe 2 megabits if you're doing digital modes with multiple screens and all that stuff for each station to be able to stream its video out. Latencies, as we were talking about there earlier, at 100 milliseconds, you start to notice the audio and clicking response delays. This 100 millisecond one way, so double that for the round trip. If you get up to 250 or so, it starts to get annoying. At 500, you're really going to start noticing that people are sending their calls a second time by the time you start hearing them. And you go to click a function key, they're sending again before your message gets out. So that's the kind of things you got to look out for. The worst one, at least if you're doing sideband or CW, is jitter. And what happens with jitter is that's how much the latency changes over a period of time. From one packet to the next, they go from 100 milliseconds to 300 milliseconds. In the latency, you get that delay increases, and suddenly you're missing 200 milliseconds of audio because those packets got lost where they were late showing up, so it drops out, it comes back, so you get the gaps in the audio and stuff like that. As Chuck was mentioning, the ping is a neat tool. Anybody that's trying to do anything with remote operating stuff should learn about the ping tool that's available in all PCs. You can get it for iDevices and whatever else. It's out there for everything. This is 2 tests of pinging over a period of time. The one on the left is a ping of google.com. And of course, they've got a real good backbone, and mine's a pretty good backbone. So they were going 14 to 17, up to 20, 23 milliseconds at most. That's very good. That's you'd love to see that going to a remote station. Unfortunately, what happens is you get ones like on the right, where it's going from 85, 87 milliseconds to 370. I think that was the highest one here, 374. And that's where you're going to start seeing dropouts in video, dropouts in audio, and you're going to start losing data. If it takes more than 2 seconds, then the ping will give up. It says lost, or I forget what it says, reply timed out or whatever it is. And that's really bad. If you're getting that going to a remote station, any lost packets going to a remote station, there's something wrong. You got to get your ISP or find it in your network or whatever the problem may be. One thing that I have found that is very handy is I leave in one of the server machines I've got I leave two pings going continuously. One goes out from my network to either Google or one of the DNS servers, 1.1.1.1 or 8.8.8.8. That just runs continuously. Gives me something I can look at real quick if there's any problems to see if it's outside. Or another one that I leave running is between that same machine and the SO2R computer. And I found that that really helps internally over the Wi-Fi connection, and it keeps that connection active. There's always something going back and forth between the SO2R computer and my server rack. So I can tell if there's something internally wrong. Usually, a computer needs to be rebooted, or the access point needs to be rebooted, or if it's something outside. And keeping both of those going, I think helps with delays when it's looking up, when you're web surfing, going on a web browser. You've got to go to a DNS server to look up the addresses and stuff like that. And by keeping those going, I think it keeps the connection outside active also and makes DNS responses come back quicker. I can't prove that yet, but I think it does. But anyway, that's something to learn about. Okay, remote access software. This is another one we've gone through several different evolutions of here. There's, again, three different things to think about on remote access doing this kind of remote operating. You got to see the desktop where everything's running. You need audio, at least for sideband and CW, not so much for digital modes. And then some way to send CW or do the digital stuff, whatever, but mostly from the desktop. Windows Remote Desktop, also you'll see it written as RDP or various other acronyms. It's horrible. Don't even try it. It breaks audio devices. You can't listen to things. You can't switch them. You have holes in firewalls. There's security questions about it. I wouldn't even think about it. There are some tools out there that I've been pointed to that people say, oh yeah, use this. But in the background, they're using the remote desktop, and it just doesn't work. The first one we did that really worked here was TeamViewer. It works. It's not bad. I like AnyDesk better. They get upset at you if it looks like you're using it commercially. So if you got more than one device, or you're using it for long periods, they'll see it and they'll cut you off. And then you got to go back to them and beg to be let back in to prove that you're not a commercial business trying to use the free version. AnyDesk, it's the same free version again, but they don't seem to get upset about long time use. I think the video of the desktop is better. You have better control over shrinking it if you got to fit it on a smaller screen or something like that. It does have a stereo audio capability, but it has problems with delays backing it up. That's one of the problems. If packets get dropped when you're doing audio, they tend to get buffered and delayed, and then the delay builds up over time. Some of the remote audio things that I tested over the years, if you left them, they sounded good when you first turned them on, but after an hour or so, you were 5 or 10 seconds behind on the audio. So let's look at some of that. Skype was one we used here for years. It was never really great. There always had some weird things about delays, and for some reason it always wanted to mute the CW side tone. I never did figure what it was doing with that. And even the voice monitor, it would sometimes mute that. I think it thought it was an echo or something, and it would mute the play, the audio coming back to you. And now since Microsoft took it over, it's become really a pain with its automatic updates that you just can't turn off. You really have to go in and bugger it up to make it stop updating itself, usually at the worst times. The one that we're using now is this combination Mumble and Murmur. Mumble is the user side program. Murmur runs on a server or on the same machine as Mumble does, but it does the routing between different clients. So what I have is Murmur running on my server, and all the users and the local stations run Mumble. And it was basically designed by gamers, for chatting. And it works very nicely for chats and audio. And if you tune the adjustments properly, it doesn't build up a delay, and it does fairly nicely. The text chat is handy for multi-op stuff. Murmur, you have to configure a little bit, but it's not too bad. There's some good instructions out on the web on how to do it. And right now, I'm actually working on Mumble and Murmur are an open source project that you can go and download the code and play with it. And I tried that, but it is really ugly inside. So I took their principles and I'm writing my own to do basically the same stuff, but a much simpler, trimmed down thing that'll be useful just for radio. Remote access software for CW. N1MM Plus does great, sends from the keyboard. That's all that I use. I do have some users that are, well, at least one, I think maybe a second one tried it, this WK remote software. It's really weird and not easy to set it up. It has weird spacing problems that it just makes it sound strange. There is other software and hardware combinations, the remote ham radio stuff. It's better, I think, but I don't have any real experience with it here. That was one of my goals in this in the beginning is I didn't want to have my users have to go out and buy something. So, I don't use any of the remote control heads for the radios or the remote ham radio hardware, anything like that. So everything is done with software and right on your screen. The user experience in doing this, go through real quick, what it looks like and how I do it. A lot of the stuff, if you're just going to do it for yourself, you may not have to worry about, but right now I've got 25 or 30 remote users that come in here between contests and daily operating, and I needed to organize it and make it easier for them to get set up. So basically, for setting up their computers, I've made a couple of web pages that are only accessible to remote users that I give a password to get it into these pages. One of them tells them how to install all their software, the very basic how to connect to the station, how to disconnect, stuff like that. Again, I don't let this be visible to anybody outside because it has passwords for any desk and for the Murmur server and stuff like that. And then, whoops, now I'll go back. Now I've got another page that's basically a lot of how-to, and this is how to do all this good stuff that you want to do on the radio. It isn't. This is an older picture. I put on a new one, a new section on this back in the fall called 50 Ways to Tune Your Radio. It goes through the various ways N1MM can tune radios, how to switch VFOs, and how my little app tunes radios. So there's all sorts of ways to tune things. The next thing is after they read all that stuff is before you connect, I have a status page that says who's using the station or if it's available, and gives some more notes about things that have changed or rotors that are stuck. There were 2 of them stuck when I took this picture, and hardware problems, where things are tuned. My 80 meter inverted Vs, I have 3 different tuning settings for them that remote users can't control. I have to go in and tweak them to set those. So I put a status down here to say what they're presently tuned for. I can also put a notice up here if I'm doing maintenance or if I had to shut the station off for some reason, so you can see what's the status right then. Then to connect, there's just 2 things to do. You open any desk, pick the station you want to connect to. If we're doing a multi-multi, there's 6 different HF stations you can connect to get each of their desktops. And then you connect Mumble up to the Murmur server and pick, again, the band or the station you want to listen to. Once you connect the desktop, you get to see something like this. I leave the status page available on there so in case you didn't read it before you connected, you can at least see it when you connect here. And then the left side, each user has their own N1MM icon that takes them to their log. And what those really are is those are running a PowerShell script that starts the green heron display that'll show up in the corner, and then it starts N1MM, and it does a couple checks of the radios and things to make sure it's all set up and ready to go. And after you start up your log, you see a desktop that looks something like this. Each user can move around all the N1MM windows, put them anywhere they want, resize them, doesn't matter. They can also move around the green heron windows, move them, put them anywhere they want. Right now, I prefer them not to move the other ones, the power meter, the FT2000 control app, or the Mumble app, because those are shared by everybody. And the positions don't get reset between users, at least for now. And again, operating, it's just like you're sitting in front of the radio, except there's no knobs. You got to do everything through the software on the computer. Again, these are everything that's kind of covered by this big blue box is all the N1MM. My other tools are these ones on the right side up here now. And then when you're all done, if you want to take a copy of your log, any desk provides a file transfer capability, so you don't have to use FTP or some other tool to get your log back or whatever. You just go find it, find your directory on the remote computer, go down to N1MM's database, take your database back, or you can export the Cabrillo or ADIF or whatever you want right there and take that back if that's what you want. When you disconnect, just disconnect Mumble, disconnect any desk, and you're all done. I've got a noisy dog that wants to go out, but it's too late. No, it's too early. And I don't don't know if you're going to hear this or not. This was one I recorded earlier. I don't know if you're hearing that or not, but
No copy.
no copy? Oh, well. Then we won't worry. It's just
Just
you
a
can
demo.
just watch the band map or the waterfalls bounce around.
If you want us to, if you want to give it a try, Dave, you
Whoops.
could stop sharing, go back to
No,
your sharing,
just a
and
second.
select the button that says share the desktop audio.
Can you
Yep,
hear
we hear
this? You can hear that. Okay. Because I have, this is live right now, so you can. Geez, he's still there. I tuned on to him 2 hours ago.
Who is it?
Lima Zulu 1340 Bravo.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Yeah, they do a different wacky number LZ call like every 3 weeks or month.
And they say the one difference down here is we have the Power Genius amp on here instead of the ACOMs now. So, be quiet. Okay, so we do questions, I guess. Should I stop sharing, or do we want to?
Well, keep it up for a minute
Screen
in
up
case somebody has a question about a specific page.
Or we can look at this too. It's the live feed as it is. I know we're up to the DMR net time. If anybody wanted
Thanks
to run
for
off for that, but
yeah, thanks for bringing that up. So Dave's always looking for operators for the big contests. And does anybody have any questions for Dave?
I have one. This is Chuck.
yeah,
Go ahead.
What size monitor in pixels does a remote user or should a remote user have in order to accommodate all this stuff?
Well, the way this one is set up on here now, I leave it set at 1920 by 1080. The monitor actually goes, because that seems to be good for general operating and not take too much bandwidth. You can take this one up to 2560 by 1440, which is, I forget what the thing is. That 4K? I don't remember now. That's what we use if you're going to do RIDI or FT8 with 2 radios, because there's just not enough room on the 1920 by 1080 to get all that stuff there and make them usable.
Can any desk accommodate more than one monitor at one end?
Yeah. Well, I don't know how it does it for the remote end, because the way I have two different computers. One of them running the Green Heron, and the other one running the desktop.
It does support multiple monitors, but at the remote end, the not your station end, you have to choose one monitor or the other in their interface. I don't think you can pop out both monitors.
Yeah, there might be some way to do it. I haven't really worried about that since I'm only running the one monitor on each computer. But if you have 2 monitors at home that you're using, you can put the antenna switches on one monitor and the desktop on the other monitor. That works fine.
Thank you.
Okay. Anybody else?
Yeah, Dave, this is Jim, K1IR. We've been doing lots of station automation here, and we're using the RRCs. One of the things that we haven't done anything with is the amplifiers. And I'm wondering if the work that you've done on the ACOM director is something that, as a chunk, we could use.
Sure. If
What
you're
are
using the
its dependencies? Where does it get its frequency?
for the ACOM?
Yes.
I have the ACOM here set up just for RF sensing, so that they
Oh.
just sense the transmitted RF.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you said that you had some auto tuning or pre-tuning.
Yeah, I do that for the antenna selection.
Ah.
So you can pre-tune the ACOMs for what, 9 antennas on each of the band segments.
Yeah.
So all I do is pre-tune antenna 0 is the inverted V, antenna 1 is the inverted L.
Okay.
And then when it senses that the green heron has selected the inverted L's, it tells the ACOM to tune to
Okay.
antenna 0.
Got you.
So the smarts is actually in the ACOM. I'm just passing the data on.
Right. Okay.
You can do that manually too, not through my app, but through the ACOM Director app. You can manually tell it to switch antennas.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you.
Okay. Anybody else?
Yeah, I had a question for Dave, following up on the software. Is the ACOM Director and some of these other programs available on your website or just by arrangement and request?
Right now, by request, the ACOM Director, that is the M0, I forget it's called, YOM, is that it?
Sounds right.
That's on his website. My stuff, I can package it up and make it available to anybody that wants it or that wants the source code if you want to do more development, whatever. I haven't really written a lot of instructions on a lot of it besides what's on my web pages for the users, but hopefully it's not too bad if you wanted to get it and use it.
Okay, Dave, great, thanks. Any other questions for Dave? Dave, thanks so much. Go ahead.
It's not a question. I just said that I wanted to say that I tried Dave's remote setup and it works really great.
Okay.
Yep. I've used it. It does too.
I have to tell you, Mumble and Murmur was quite good. I was very impressed. A little tough to set up initially. Dave helped me with that, but it was really good as far as the latency. Audio was almost right on time. We have pretty fast internet here anyway. But hey, Dave, that software you're running to adjust the radios with the sliders and so forth? You had that set up for the FT2000. I run both mine are FT5000s, but I'll bet you they're pretty close.
Oh yeah, it should work with most of the, at least 2000 later. There may be some differences in menu settings and whatever internally, but I think they kept the firmware pretty similar in those.
Yeah, I think you're probably right. Is that available if I send you a really nice email and plead a bit?
Oh yeah, no problem.
Okay.
Green
Cool.
stamps. Green stamps.
Green stamps. There you go.
No, good scotch.
There you go. That's even better. Thanks, Dave. Appreciate it.
Okay.
Fantastic. Thanks a lot, Dave.
Okay.
Let the puppies out.
Yeah, shortly.
You do it too early, you're doing it again.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, he laid down. He realized he wasn't getting out right away. So. Okay. Oops.
Very good.
Okay. There we go.
Thank you so much, Dave.
Okie doke.
Yeah, thanks, Dave.
Thanks.
I'm
Appreciate
going to
it.
bow out, guys. I'm going to go to another meeting. Good to meet everybody.
Thanks, Tom.
Dave.
Bye-bye. So next month,
Somebody has
Mic
their
turned down.
somebody's got a mic on.
You muted, Charlie.
Thank you. Next month is February meeting. On the 11th, it's a Thursday at 7. Double check that. And it's on the front page of the White CCC website, in case you forget. We have a speaker who's going to talk about another type of remote system, and that's remote hams. I've used it with him, and it really is a good alternative. The speaker will be Don, WA1BXY. And Jim, have you tried it? And Jim NK, are you still here?
Yeah, I just have to fumble around and find my mouse.
Yeah. Have you used remote hams with Don?
Negative.
Okay. All right. If I can indulge for a minute, I'm going to share my screen just for a minute. Very good. So I got a couple of quick things. Are you seeing my screen?
Yes. Yep.
Okay. So
Yes.
can you hear this?
No.
No, but the
No.
videographer did a
No.
great job.
There's Joe. Yeah. Okay, sorry you couldn't hear that. So that's the Kaiser XG ring rotor on the big tower to hold the 20. I had a crane here early December, and we did two things. We had a bucket to repair the 15-meter feed point, which is the bottom antenna in this picture. KM1P went up and swapped out the feed line and the broken feed point. And that went really well. And then right after that, we grabbed the 6-element OWA 20 on a 48-foot boom, designed for 130 miles an hour, and we picked it up to the big tower. Jim N1NK's in the picture. W01N was the videographer, and we put it up there under the 40. It's a 350-pound antenna. So it's going to be 20, 40, and 160. Plus there's a walk antenna up there. 2/2 on 40. There's also WM1K's hard hat. Mike used to help me here for over 20 years, and he passed away 2 months ago. And I put his hard hat that had his call sign on it that he used whenever he was here, and that is on the boom of that antenna. So thanks for coming. I'm going to stop sharing. Thanks very much for coming. Hope you enjoyed tonight. Jim, can we leave this running for a few minutes?
Oh, absolutely.
Did you stop the recording?
Oh, let me do that.